Star Wars has started treating the Jedi like villains, and that's a problem. Hello there, and welcome to today's video. Now, Star Wars hasn't been in a great place recently, but the real problem isn't necessarily the shows, it's how the Jedi are being portrayed. So today, I want to focus on a problem that is central to Disney's mishandling of the franchise. A problem that was highlighted by the Acolyte showrunner Leslie Headland a little while ago when she spoke about her plans for the Acolyte Season 2. And here's the thing, if this problem isn't rectified soon, I think Star Wars as an IP will end up consigned to the dumpster of history. And this problem has everything to do with the Jedi and how they've been utilized in Star Wars since Disney took over. But before we get to that, I think it's important to understand what the Jedi represented within George Lucas's vision, because I think that this problem originates from a misconception about the Lucas-era Jedi. And unfortunately, it's a misconception that's becoming more and more prevalent within the fan base as time goes on. At its core, the original trilogy of Star Wars movies focuses on character. And I think that's one of the reasons it resonated with people so much. Information on the greater galaxy and how things operated and what things truly were often left vague, with small lines and tidbits dropped that served to excite the imagination of viewers, rather than giving them a full picture. And this is true even for the very concept of what a Jedi even is. The OT rarely sits the audience down and explains exactly what a Jedi is and what a person needs to do to become one. Instead, we have two lines, one from A New Hope and one from The Empire Strikes Back, that ultimately serve as the audience understanding of the concept of a Jedi. The first bit of information we get is from Obi-Wan when he tells Luke,
For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic. Before the dark times. Before the Empire.
Now, this is a pretty bare-bones line, but it gives the audience a pretty solid foundational understanding of the Jedi within the Star Wars galaxy. I mean, if you only ever watch A New Hope, you could assume that the Jedi was something akin to space cops, upholding the law and serving justice throughout the galaxy. But Yoda in Empire complicates this understanding a little bit when he says,
A Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack.
But tell me why I can't...
No, there is no why.
Now it's this line that really makes things interesting, because it shifts our understanding of the Jedi away from the image we initially had of them. Instead of picturing space cops when we think of Jedi, the mental image has now been shifted to something more closely representing a warrior monk. And this is especially apparent when Yoda differentiates the light side from the dark, saying that the dark side is defined by anger, fear, and aggression, while making it clear that the Force is a Jedi's greatest ally. Beyond this, we really had no idea what a Jedi was. I mean, the only other true bit of information we get is that Luke will become a Jedi Knight in full when he kills Darth Vader and the Emperor. It's the prequels that truly expand our understanding and help us understand what Jedi are supposed to be in George Lucas's mind. And ironically enough, the full understanding of what a Jedi is supposed to be actually comes mostly from Anakin Skywalker and his doomed attempts to live up to the ideals of a Jedi. But that's an analysis for another time. Now there are two quotes that I want to touch on that I think truly expands our understanding of what a Jedi is in the Star Wars universe. The first comes when Anakin is talking to Padme in Attack of the Clones, and he says,
Attachment is forbidden. Possession is forbidden. Compassion, which I would define as unconditional love, is central to a Jedi's life. So you might say that we are encouraged to love.
Now this is one of those things that people have misinterpreted for the longest time. They take it to mean that Jedi aren't allowed to have emotions, that they're supposed to live without love. But that's not quite true. What is expected of a Jedi is for them to put the needs of others above their own. That's why Qui-Gon tells Anakin that it's such a hard life. And think about it like this, right? If there was a guy whose job was to save as many people as he could on a nearly daily basis, I mean, you'd want him to remain pretty rational and objective, right? I mean, You'd want him to put everyone's safety on the same even playing field. But now, give that man an attachment, like a girlfriend or wife or partner, and all of a sudden, he's going to be prioritizing their safety over the safety of everybody else. That's what a Jedi's no-attachment philosophy is truly about, keeping the Jedi impartial. They're allowed to have friends and experience emotions, but they can't be so attached to these physical things that emotions dictate their choices. Which brings us pretty neatly into Anakin's next quote from The Revenge of the Sith, where he tells Palpatine,
The Jedi use their power for good. The Jedi are selfless. They only care about others.
Now this line really establishes the core of the Jedi. In Lucas's mind, the Jedi are what we should all be striving towards. We should be more selfless than we are selfish. We should be trying to do good throughout our lives and to try and be the best versions of ourselves. It's ironic that Anakin understands all of this on a logical level, but he doesn't have the emotional maturity to actually apply it in his life. See, he loves those around him fully, but because of that, he can't let them go. But I mean, if the Jedi are supposed to be these perfect paragons, well, why did they fall? Now this is the biggest point of misunderstanding for so many who watched the prequels. The story being shown throughout the prequels is of a Jedi Order at the height of their powers. They haven't had to deal with the threat of the dark side in millennia. The Jedi have allowed themselves to grow overconfident.
Impossible. The Sith have been extinct for a millennium.
I do not believe the Sith could have returned without us knowing.
They have also become far too involved in the affairs of the Republic, choosing to abide by Senate bureaucracy rather than listen to the will of the Force. And this is actually the heart of the argument Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are having after arriving back on Coruscant in The Phantom Menace. And this is really important for what Lucas was trying to tell us. Look at how it took the death of Qui-Gon Jinn for the Jedi to accept that the Sith were back. Look at how the Council, and Yoda specifically, ignored the building fear in Anakin to instead recite platitudes that couldn't and ultimately didn't help him get away from those fears. And the biggest one of all is how the Jedi sat opposite Palpatine. They discussed matters that had galaxy-wide ramifications with him, and yet couldn't sense that he was a Sith Lord. These aren't signs of corruption. They're signs of complacency and blindness. What Lucas was doing was showing us as an audience how institutions that were created with the best of intentions and with strong moral centers can still fall beneath the weight of violence, greed, and manipulation. The prequels weren't meant to be a story about how the Jedi were flawed and always had been flawed. They were a story meant to show the dangers of complacency and how easily democracy can fall when we prioritize safety. But that's not what people saw when they looked at the story being told. Now, as with most things when talking about modern Star Wars, The Last Jedi played its part in furthering the misunderstanding of the prequels. Upon meeting a broken and defeated Luke Skywalker, check out why that's a bad thing here, he has 3 lessons for Rey, though he only actually imparts 2, that attempt to reframe the Jedi but instead break them, and by extension, the entire Star Wars galaxy. For lesson 1, he says,
And this is the lesson. That force does not belong to the Jedi. To say that if the Jedi die, the light dies is vanity. Can you feel that?
Now this is a line designed to reframe the Jedi quite unfairly. Not once in either the OT or the prequels did the Jedi ever claim to own the Force. It's a fallacy to further the idea that the Jedi as an institution were flawed. And when he says that it's vanity, that if the Jedi die then the light dies, well, I mean, that doesn't align with what we've been shown before. The Jedi actively combat the dark side. If the Jedi die, the Sith don't just magically disappear. And Luke should know this, considering he grew up in an era where the Jedi were theoretically wiped out and the Sith ruled. It goes back to a fundamental misunderstanding of what balance is supposed to be in Star Wars. And Lesson 2 just gets worse when he says,
Lesson 2. Now that they're extinct, the Jedi are romanticized, deified. But if you strip away the myth and look at their deeds, the legacy of the Jedi is failure. A hypocrisy, hubris. At the height of their powers, they allowed Darth Sidious to rise, create the Empire, and wipe them out. He was a Jedi Master who was responsible for the training and creation of Darth Vader.
Now let me clear this misconception up real quick. In A New Hope, Obi-Wan says the Jedi were the guardians of peace and justice for 1,000 generations. A quick bit of Googling tells us that 1,000 generations can be anywhere from 25,000 years to 40,000 years. Think about what that means. For tens of thousands of years, the Jedi protected peace throughout the galaxy. And what? We call them failures for 20 of those years not going right? That is not a legacy of failure. That is a proven track record that honestly goes a step further in explaining their complacency in the prequels. But Rian Johnson wanted to send a message with his story. Ironically enough, he wanted to spread a message of failure and its consequences. But to do so, he twisted the Jedi's history to portray them in a negative light. One that was not originally intended nor worked based on all of the prior information. But it did the job he intended. People began to talk about how flawed the Jedi were, how they mistreated Anakin, and how they weren't actually paragons of virtue that should be aspired to. And that mentality has spread throughout Lucasfilm. See, a while ago, Leslie Headland went on a podcast and opened up about her plans for Season 2 of the much-maligned Star Wars show, The Acolyte. Here, she said that Yoda would have helped cover up Saul's death and spread the lie that he was a rogue Jedi, arguing that this would have explored Yoda's dark side and isn't anything the character hasn't done before. And this says it all. This is someone Lucasfilm trusted with millions of dollars to make a Star Wars show, and they didn't get it. Yoda is the Jedi Order's moral center. To believe that he, and by extension the Jedi Order, are capable of this kind of corruption is to have missed the entire point of what the Jedi are. Because once the Jedi become capable of intentional moral corruption, well, they stop being Jedi at all. Modern Hollywood writers have gotten so comfortable deconstructing heroes, tearing them down and leaving nothing left for audiences to aspire to, that it really is beginning to beg the question, why? And the worst part is, if you wanted to explore Yoda's moral failings, there was already a perfect avenue in which to do so. The following is a quote from the novel Yoda, Dark Rendezvous.
The Jedi Order's problem is Yoda. No being can wield that kind of power for centuries without becoming complacent at best or corrupt at worst. He has no idea that it's overtaken him. He no longer sees all the little cumulative evils that the Republic tolerates and fosters, from slavery to endless wars, and he never asks, why are we not acting to stop this? Live alongside corruption for too long, and you no longer notice the stench. The Jedi cannot help the slaves of Tatooine, but they can help the slave masters.
If you want to dissect and analyze Yoda's failings, this is how to do it. Not that he's an immoral being who will participate in blatantly unjust and shady dealings and cover-ups, but by exploring the ideas Lucas had already established about complacency, and how that can blind even the most virtuous to the true evils lurking right in front of them. But like you asking right now, why does this matter? Why do the Jedi matter to Star Wars? And you know what? I'll tell you. The Jedi are the very heart of Star Wars. One of the reasons Star Wars has endured for as long as it has is because of the characters. And one of the most fundamental aspects of Luke Skywalker's character journey is his road to becoming a Jedi in full. At the end of Return of the Jedi, Luke does something unexpected. He doesn't win by strength. He wins by refusing to fight in a scene that is still probably one of my favorite in cinema to this day. Because it's a road that culminates in him telling the Emperor, the most evil man in the galaxy, I won't fight you. I won't fight you because I am a Jedi, and that's not what Jedi do. In a single line, Luke reframes the entirety of the Jedi, who they are, what they believe in, and how they operate into a single core. And that core is compassion and selflessness. The whole original trilogy was leading up to this moment because George Lucas wanted to impart values of bravery, kindness, selflessness, and spirituality into young boys. He wanted to give us, as an audience, a practical example to look at when we contemplate the phrase, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." Now, this quote has been misattributed to Edmund Burke, but the message still stands, and it warns against complacency, against getting comfortable with the evils that surround us on a daily basis. And that's what Lucas chose to focus on when making the prequels. But without it, without the Jedi being a beacon of virtue, decency, and selflessness, well, Star Wars loses what makes it so special. It loses the foundation it was built on, and once it loses that foundation, all you're left with is a bunch of special effects and space noises. Now, I could spend a whole video detailing why I think there's such a push for deconstructing heroes in modern media. One that would range from a false belief that modern stories would be boring and predictable if it didn't happen, to the idea that these modern writers are attempting to drag our heroes down to the mud, so that they don't have to feel inadequate when they look to their example. But I won't. All I'll say is that the Jedi matter. Star Wars matters. And it matters because it taught us that we could be better, that we could aspire to be more. And right now, that's a lesson that we need more than ever.